Now we're going to talk about LGBTQ and hip hop. So just a brief history because that's something we don't really talk about in those circles. So it's no secret that historically hip hop hasn't been the most welcoming environment for people from that community. It's not uncommon for hints of like queerphobia or transphobia in lyrics, or like just artists straight out saying that they're anti-gay or anti-trans. But that wasn't enough to stop rappers coming from like these communities to grow and perform. The first instance that I saw of like a rapper kind of making it while being queer or trans was in the 80s. So that's when the homo hop movement started, later rebaptized queer hip hop. So these people are not associated with like a specific genre. It's just like an artist who is also queer or also trans, or like or they incorporate part of the LGBTQ community into their artistry. So contemporary example of that is Big Freedia, Azealia Banks, Haze, Bali Baby, Young M.A, Kehlani, Princess Nokia, Syd the Kid. Do you guys want to shout some other people out? We can come back to that.
You listed all my favorites.
So yeah, but also at the same time, a majority of mainstream successful queer rappers or trans rappers are men. So I was wondering if you have an idea why women are not being able to break out as much while being queer as well.
I think going back to kind of like the history of like women coming into hip hop, for a while it was all about like how they can appeal to men. And so, for example, you had like Young M.A come out, and she is not about men at all. And it was almost like men were offended. Like, who is this woman coming here? Like, first of all, taking our shorties. Like, she's not everybody's girl, first of all. But also, like, she does not care about us. Like, she's not here for us, and she's rapping harder than, like, 90% of us here. And so I feel like, again, like Liz was mentioning, a lot of the gatekeepers are men. And so they just don't want to let these women in because it intimidates them, and it threatens the structure that they've created within music and within hip hop. That is essentially like making them money right now.
Also, just to go back to Young M.A, one thing that I found interesting while I was doing the research is that a lot of people are like, wow, this is crazy. She made it, and she's not sexual. Like, she's really like asexual, but it's not because she's not sexually appealing to you that she's not sexually appealing to someone else. So do you guys want to talk about like ways to be like appealing to an audience that is not necessarily straight men? Or like examples, or like
how
like breaking out of like the male gaze.
Be yourself. Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Like I think it all comes from you. You know, it all starts within you. You have to have that. You have to internalize and embrace that swagger, that natural swagger, the charm, all of that. Because I feel like that's how Young M.A really rose, you know? She was literally just herself the entire time. And she's got mad confidence, and she didn't sugarcoat that. So just be yourself. Don't sugarcoat yourself.
So a lot of parallels can be made between the marginalization of women and people who are coming from the LGBTQ community. For example, when women who are rappers come out, a lot of people are just labeling them femc and just thinking of them in that category. Same thing for queer artists or trans artists. They're labeled queer hip-hop or like homo hop. So what do you think of that tendency of like labeling people like that, even though like one queer rapper might be trap, where the other one is boom bap? What do you think of that tendency? Isn't it like relegating them to like one side and just?
I feel like in some ways people do this to kind of shrink them into a box. So it's like, you guys just stay over here, like you guys are part of this group, when in reality these artists are great enough to be on like major charts,
The same stage.
Yeah. And so I think it's a difference between us having safe spaces for these artists and people using these spaces to just kind of like push these artists to the side while we let other artists kind of like take over the charts and the main stages and all of that. So I think while still letting them have their safe spaces and making sure that those safe spaces exist, we need to get them up on these charts because they deserve to be there.
So yeah, so do you think we should like cling to those labels? Like, what should we do with like FMCs and like queer hip hop and those labels?
I think their identities should be recognized and no part of who they are should be erased, but I don't think that their identities should keep them in a box that limits them from being as successful as they should be.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So as like the LGBTQ community gains more acceptance, it becomes more and more financially viable to be queer or like to associate with that community. So like it's becoming commercialized as well. So I was reading about this and I saw that some people are accusing rappers like Nicki Minaj to play into bisexuality, whether it's lyrics or like way she interacts with other women in videos, but then never addressing that question. Do you think it's exploitative? Do you think?
I definitely think it's exploitative. Like it's unfair, kind of too, because it's like you're not really about that, but that's all you're talking about, and you're playing into that. So I just feel like it discredits the people who are actually like that, and yeah.
Okay. Well, there are people like this, but other people have tried to adopt a position of allyship. So once again, I want to talk about like ways we can concretely help people in hip hop who are queer or trans to make it up.
Yeah, I think like there are so many binaries within hip hop. Like even going back to the history, it's all about like the man and the woman, and kind of just even in songs like "Hey ladies," like you hear that, and I feel like we need to be more conscious of like for folks I am queer, but for folks who aren't queer and who want to like be an ally to like the community, I feel like watch your lyrics and just like make sure you're being honest and genuine with how you're communicating, and don't like just stick to binaries or like very homophobic or queerphobic ways of communicating just because it's like the way it's always been done in hip hop, or just because it sounds good or it's a cool lyric or it rhymes. Like be aware of like the violence that can exist in your actual message, and then also like going back to like creating space. We were talking about like just like be yourself and express yourself how you want to, but that's not always safe for a lot of like queer folks. So just like figuring out ways to actually make safe space like a genuine thing, like asking pronouns at like events in like a local context, and just making sure like that's the norm, because not everyone uses like he, him, or she, her pronouns. Like that's just a very basic thing that like people can do to like make sure that like people feel like okay, I'm seen, I'm like okay, and it's like safer space, right? Like not every space can like genuinely.
Do you want to
guarantee.
explain what the concept of safer spaces is?
Yeah, so like safer space with a R instead of just safe space, because every space has the potential to be harmful for someone. So that's just like keeping that in mind and knowing that like someone could be triggered at any point in time, but just doing your very best to like hold space in a meaningful way that makes everyone feel comfortable. It's safer space.
So do you have, besides asking for pronouns, do you have other examples of ways to make a space safer? And that's a question for everybody.
Sorry, I took the microphone. But I really like what you said about like mentioning pronouns like in different environments. Like as soon as we come in a public setting, I think that's a really important way that we should be making safe like spaces much safer for others. It's just like, okay, let's go around in a circle, everyone say your name, pronoun, and like something you like about yourself or whatever. It's just like one of the small things we can do. So I really like that you said that.